Thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
I'm Bill Dries with the Daily Memphian. This is On the Record. We record this Wednesday, May 25th, 2022. Joining us is Dr. Earl Fisher, the pastor of Abyssinian Missionary Baptist Church and co-founder of Up the Vote 901, as well as the Black Clergy Collaborative. And we're here as part of our continuing look at the issue of partisan primary elections on the local level. As you've seen on the WKNO program Behind the Headlines, Shelby County Election Commission Chairman and former County Mayor Mark Luttrell saying he thinks the time has come to do away with partisan primaries in county elections like the ones we had earlier this month, or for the parties to at least mute the primaries by working out who will run in advance and then having primary elections for those races where they can't be worked out. That comes against the backdrop of the Memphis City Council taking a final vote at its first meeting in June on a referendum ordinance for the November ballot that would give the local Democratic and Republican parties the option of having primaries in city elections starting in 2023 if voters approve. Since the show with Luttrell aired last week as we record this, lots of feedback agreeing and disagreeing with the idea. Dr. Fisher, what about that? Is this the time to do away with local county primary elections in Shelby County?
Brother Bill, thanks for having me again, especially on such a hot topic. I think before we get started, in light of what the day is, we send condolences and thoughts and prayers to people who have suffered from mass shootings, Buffalo yesterday in Texas. And I think that this is important because there's a lot of conversation that is happening now around legislation and what can and should or won't be done by people who are elected to office. And so when we start thinking about what primary elections mean and how they impact what ultimately happens to people's lives on the ground, it's important to look at the overarching themes of why we have elections, what they're intended to do, and then what has come of them in recent years. The short answer to your question is no, you don't do away with it. And I would be hard pressed to find any county or city in the country where the majority of the population are white male property owners and it is ran by a minority group in that particular constituency or in that particular demographic and area. And then people are saying you should do away with primary elections because part of what primary elections do is minimize the option of what we know to be a split vote. And so if you think about the municipal election in 2019, if you think about the municipal election, especially in 2015, where there were several different Black candidates and then one white male candidate, Mayor Strickland in this instance in 2015. You tally up all of the votes and you realize it happened at least in part, and I think in 2015 we could say in large part, because there was no process by which you can organize a consensus candidate under a particular party umbrella. So I'm glad to know that the Memphis City Council is discussing now what it means to have partisan elections at the city and municipal level. And I think it's ridiculous to talk about muting or removing altogether partisan elections at the county level, because I think you would end up with more of the same. You end up with several different candidates who have some form of a Democratic affiliation. And then you would have one Republican candidate or someone with a Republican affiliation. And I think it's hard to get equitable representation when you gerrymander the electoral process such that the people who are representative of a small group or a minority group in the county or in the city are often given access to some of the more powerful and most powerful political platforms in the area.
So are the primaries then the local primaries? Do they amount to being a runoff ahead of the general election, by your view?
I think that's one way to look at it. Here's the other thing, though, Brother Bill. It allows a under-informed and often ill-informed electorate that is easily manipulated and exploited in the current format to get access to several different candidates who say they share the same views or have the same stance. So it's not just a runoff, right? Because runoffs, if you talk about runoffs proper, generally have about 5% turnout and generally are engaged by the most affluent in a community. People who have the luxury of taking off of work, or people who, have enough economic or intellectual resources to do some of the deep dives that everyday citizens either cannot do or will not do. When you have a primary, it gives people chances to engage in robust conversation about issues that are important to them. When you remove that, then you muck up the process in ways that allow for more exploitation and manipulation. And I think it's interesting, at the very least, it's remarkable that both Director Phillips and Chairman Luttrell, former County Mayor Luttrell, are having this conversation now, but we're not having a conversation 10, 15, 20 years ago. I think the conditions were tactically the same, but the demographic has shifted insofar as, what you called in 2018, I think you called it a blue wave.
Mm-hmm.
And, this activism that has taken place over the last several years that have gotten more people actively involved and engaged, even against the backdrop of all matter and manner of voter suppression tactics. Here we are now having a conversation about, removing partisan primaries at the county level. Why didn't we have a conversation 10 or 15 years ago?
Well, yeah, and you talked about low turnout when the city had a runoff election, and in other areas where there are runoff elections, the turnout is historically low. We just got through with some primaries earlier this month here, though, where the turnout was 11%, and much of that attributed to the fact that the Republicans only had one contested primary on their particular slate. But even before that, I mean, in the 30-year history of this set of county primaries, the turnout has never been above 18% for this set of contests. So what then are we to make of the low turnout for this set of primaries for the bulk of county offices that we've seen over the last 3 decades? I mean, how does continuing to have these primaries increase that turnout, which I think is something we all want, right?
Well, I'm not sure it's something we all want. And I'm referring now to the behind the headlines conversation that you and Brother Eric had with, again, former Mayor Luttrell and Executive Director Phillips, because you asked them very poignantly, if they should be about the business or of increasing voter turnout, or if you just kind of follow the patterns. And her response was, you follow the pattern. And that they do it conspicuously based upon some local knowledge was her reference. And the local knowledge in this regard was what she called, out of her own mouth, some crude process of driving around neighborhoods. She didn't say which neighborhoods, right? But just driving around neighborhoods and trying to see how many political campaign signs was up so that they would know how much interest is there. And I just feel like that's reverse engineering of what I called several weeks ago, the self-fulfilling prophecy of low turnout. You can recall, Brother Bill, we had conversations about this in the moment. I said, there's going to be low turnout, and there's going to be low turnout because of the way Republicans organized their ballots such that only in County Commission District 4 was there any contest. Now, that's their prerogative. But I think it's also part of a larger strategy. the strategy of dictating and determining how low turnout is going to be accomplished, so you can say things that give you a better opportunity as a minority party in Shelby County to manipulate and exploit the electorate and maintain or obtain positions of power. At the end of the day, if we believe every vote counts, we should believe that it counts in every election. And unless people are going to try to orchestrate ways to ensure or at least minimize, and this is what I think county primaries, city primaries would do, minimize the potential of someone sneaking into office as the byproduct of a split vote, which ultimately means you get in the office even though you don't represent the majority of the citizens. That's the problem here. That's the fundamental problem here. And they're saying that they don't care if you represent the majority of the people. They don't care if there is what we call in the nation's history taxation without adequate representation. What they're saying is there's low turnout. They're saying that there's low turnout because of a lack of interest, but don't even consider it to be their job to help orchestrate or increase the interest. So I would say, who is the we in Sister Phillips's articulation about, we think certain races are important? Who amongst them gets to decide which races are important and for whom? I thought every race was important, and I thought every vote mattered.
Well, and you raise an interesting point about how much arm twisting there should be by local or state party leaders ahead of the candidate filing deadline for a primary. I mean, by its definition, the primary is a function of that particular political party, isn't it? So yes. And they can determine who is a bona fide Republican or a bona fide Democrat to run on their particular ballot. Aren't there some things that the parties can and will do to continue to manipulate who appears on their slate of candidates on both sides?
Yeah, even though we've only really seen it on one side historically. I don't think we've seen anything to the contrary, at least in the recent memory of my involvement with political organizing and activism. I haven't seen anything close to this level of orchestration or manipulation on behalf of the Shelby County Democratic Party, where only one person is running in a contested race in the primary. So again, I think this is part of the broader strategy to obtain and maintain positions of power. So don't penalize the people and reduce their voice to a different set of circumstances in a general election simply because you don't deem it advantageous for your own individual political party. Again, I want to go back to something that former Mayor Luttrell said in the interview about how this becomes this is where parties turn inward. Well, that's the purpose of the primary. And I don't see anybody on the right significantly trying to build broad-based coalitions across the county in ways that enact public policy that benefits the vast majority of the citizens. Again, that is their prerogative. But to orchestrate circumstances and situations where you try to justify taking another vote away from, let's call it what it is, Black communities, poor communities, underrepresented and underserved communities throughout the county is heinous, actually. I mean, it's vindictive. Now, I cannot knock them necessarily because they're doing what they can to try to obtain and maintain political power. And sometimes I wish people who claim to have Black people's interest at heart would organize and do something similar. And by similar, I don't mean try to reduce the number of opportunities people have to engage with candidates and select who they feel like represents them. I'm saying organize in ways where you obtain and maintain political power on behalf of the people. I just don't see that happen. But to try to say that the primaries are times when parties turn insular, I mean, that's part and parcel of what the primary process is. But it is ultimately about making sure you don't have several representatives in your party running against one representative in the other party, which basically guarantees a victory for the lone representative.
Is there a level of turnout in this, in primaries, that is healthier, do you think? Where the results tend to be some offices for both parties, or do we continue to see the sweep or near sweep by one party or the other? Because as I noted on the TV show, I've heard party chairmen on both sides, local party chairmen on both sides, say we need to do away with the primaries, Democrats and Republicans, and every time it will be coming from the side that didn't fare that well in the last primaries. So yeah. It is the answer to this is keeping primaries, maybe some election cycles where each party walks away with some victories.
That's aspirational. I just don't feel like you accomplish that until you have a more informed, engaged, and empowered electorate. And the political landscape right now is not necessarily interested in that. And I'm talking about people on both sides of the aisle. What people on both sides of the aisle are interested in right now seems to be trying to do their best to exploit and manipulate a small number of voters because that seems to guarantee victory for them. And they govern in that way, which is why I feel like we see so many of our people being left out of the crucial parts of the formula and equation for what it means to develop and build the kind of community and city and county that we actually want. So I can't square that circle insofar as knowing how valuable every vote is. Think about some of the results in this past primary. You had people who won their seat by 70 votes. People who won their seat by, 12 votes.
18 votes, actually.
Yeah, 18 votes. Right. So you're talking about when you go precinct to precinct now, right? When you start talking about district to district, you see how valuable and important this is insofar as representation is concerned. So the idea that the way that you solve this problem is by shrinking access to the ballot. That's ultimately what it is. It's taking an election away. It's shrinking access to the ballot box instead of expanding it and trying to expand people's access to the adequate amount of information and power that gives them access to the representation. I think this is a form of reverse engineering where a minority party because if you want to change people's competitive nature, that simply means you would have to change their core values and where they stand on issues that are important to the majority of the citizens. So most people are so enthralled by the talking points within their party, they don't care about where the majority of the people stand on a broader issue.
And you are essentially making the argument that former Mayor Luttrell made for doing away with primaries, but you're saying you get there by keeping the primaries.
Yes, and see, to your point that you made earlier, it's when the pendulum swings away and they feel like their party is empowered, where they say yeah, or that their party is benefiting more from the results that they say yes, go ahead. They wouldn't saying this in 2004. They wouldn't be saying this prior to the election of Barack Obama and some of these voter suppression tactics insofar as voter ID laws are concerned and purging of the polls and things of that nature are concerned. They were not saying it then. And I'm saying this, I don't care who is in part. I'm not going to any place where the community or the county is majority Republican and saying do away with the primary so that some more progressive candidate can sneak their way in because the Republicans have their votes split. I'm not a fan of that. I don't care who it impacts. I don't care who it privileges and benefits. I am a fan and I am a proponent of equitable representation, equitable access to the ballot box for everybody. I still believe in this crazy concept called representative democracy.
There are, however, voters that we've both talked to who don't like having to declare a part. In Tennessee, we should point out, you do not, when you register to vote, you don't register as a Democratic voter or a Republican voter. If you've participate in a ballot that has primaries on it, you're asked if you want the Democratic or Republican ballot. And I've talked to voters, and I think you've talked to voters too, who have said, I'm not really that into declaring, even at the polling place, even for those purposes, I'm not that wild about declaring which party I want to ballot for.
I've talked to people. I've talked to people who felt that way. The primary impetus for that stance for the people who I've talked to is the stigma associated with party affiliation. That they feel some kind of way that people who are in control of the elections get to heap upon these individuals certain ideological stances, whether they support them or not. However, when you talk about party primaries, this is exactly what it is. It is party primaries. So I understand, people having to identify which party they want to try to support in that regard. Now, would I be open to some conversation about what it means to allow somebody in a primary election to, cross over? Like they might want to vote in the Republican primary for the sheriff. They might want to vote in the Democratic primary for their county commission. Sure. I mean, I think I'm open to that idea. Again, if we had people who were at the forefront of our electoral process, and in this instance, I'm talking again about Director Phillips and Chairman Luttrell, if they were people who were visionary and believed in expanding the electorate and increasing access to voting and increasing voter turnout, because it means you have a higher probability of getting people in these positions who share the sentiment of the majority of the citizens, then these are things that they would be discussing. You do not discuss how to roll back access. You discuss how to expand it if you believe in the essence of democracy. I would argue and would sit there and go toe-to-toe with any of them who hold the stance that they don't believe in democracy. They don't believe in representative government. What they believe in is the manipulation of a small number of people who are usually affluent and privileged. And if you can manipulate them, it gives you access to the position of power. And then you can get in those positions and you can allocate resources that benefit those people who you believe to be your individual constituents, because you are ultimately not concerned about the things that the majority of the people in the community and in the city and in the county are concerned.
All right. A final point. And I think it's a key issue that's been within this conversation that we've had these past few minutes. It's basically, you talked about representation in the beginning. When someone is running for office, though, they're looking for enough votes to win the election. Isn't representation about what happens after the election, or should it be?
Yeah, I mean, you're getting into some of the ideals. Of course, you would hope people would get into office and say those things and do those things that amount to, I'm still, people who often when they say, I understand X number of people didn't vote for me, but I'm still your mayor too, or I'm still your president too, I'm still your such and such. We don't see them govern that way, though. That's just not the way that the landscape of politics are set up right now, which is why it's important to me to have a robust conversation too about not extending term limits. Okay, because
I had a feeling we were going to talk about that. I had a feeling.
Yeah. Because at last I looked at it, they were trying to attach the term limits to a proposal about the primary elections, or partisan elections at the municipal level. But ultimately, if you are in office 8 years, and most people, soon as they get into office their first term, instead of thinking about governing more broadly, they are thinking about how to satisfy their immediate constituents, which are the people who they feel like in that small pool of voters helped to elect them into office. So they're not going to go against the will of most of the people who endorse them or help fund their campaign. And now you end up in the cycle of just pleasing a small minority, even if what that small minority aspires to is something that's not reflective of adequate representation for the majority of the citizens. So the question we should be fundamentally dealing with is, how do we reorganize and restructure and reform our electoral process to ensure the likelihood of the people who represent the will of the majority of the citizens getting into office. That's not where we are right now. That's where we need to be, and what we have to stop doing. Because number one, we have to just stop lying about what the history is. In the conversation where you had it with Chairman Luttrell and Director Phillips, she actually said, yeah, all of the polling locations are going to be open in August, as we do in every election. That's not what they do in every election. We had to sue them in 2018 to get them to open all of the sites, right? So number one, let's just stop lying.
I think she meant for that August election cycle.
I'm saying in August of 2018, they came out with the plan where the first few days was just supposed to be the Agri Center. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
That was the plan that they put forward. So she made it seem as though the Election Commission in and of itself, under her leadership and direction, is always committed in the August election cycle to opening up every site. That's not the case. They had to be sued for that to happen. A judge ruled for that to happen in 2018. So number one, we have to stop lying about what we have done and where we are. We also have to stop moving the goalposts, because we would say we're shrinking access because we're trying to save money. She talked about saving $300,000. And now I'm talking about this recent primary election. Mm-hmm. She said something about honoring the desires of faith communities. And we had to do a press conference in front of the election commission just to articulate how there had been no conversation that she had with pastors of churches whose churches are polling precincts. So again, if we are ultimately about how to expand the electorate, if we're talking about increasing turnout, and the reason you increase the turnout is because you want to have what we would call in social sciences a large enough sample size to verify that what the people are asking for is actually representative of what the majority of the citizens want. You do that by expanding the electorate, not shrinking it. You do that by expanding access to the ballot box, not taking it away. So you don't cut out party primaries. What you do is ensure that you build the infrastructure that increases people's access to the information that allows them to feel empowered and interested enough to go out and participate in the primary. And then you build upon that momentum as you go into the general election. If you don't do that, it's by design. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where you say turnout is low, and you won't admit the turnout is low because you wait until the 11th hour to even start announcing what's happening, or you find some underhanded, undermined way to cut short access to the ballot box. And then you say, look, people didn't turn out. Brother Bill, you remember me saying this to you. I told you that turnout would be low because of how the Republican ballot was set up, but that most people would just stick with the talking point that people are apathetic, which is not the case, because correct me if I'm wrong, but despite only having the election commission downtown open the first 2 days and only 5 sites open on the third day of early voting, we still beat the number of early voters who voted in the 2018 election and 2014 election. Am I correct?
Yes, exceeded 2014 and early voting numbers in the Democratic primary, and was on par with 2018 early voting in the Democratic primary.
And to that point, I say this in conclusion. So what you see, at least on one side of the aisle, is a trend upward. And it is not ironic to me that when you see this trend upward on one side, instead of saying, let's get a trend upward on the other side, people are starting to say, no, let's cut these out altogether. That's not ironic to me. That's very telling.
All right. That's where we will leave this ongoing conversation for now. Our guest has been Dr. Earl Fisher, co-founder of Up the Vote 901 and the Black Clergy Collaborative, and pastor of Abyssinian Missionary Baptist Church in Whitehaven. I'm Bill Dries, and this has been On the Record.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.